Hello and welcome to our very first digital discussion of the year, organized by the e-estonia Briefing Center. We are especially delighted to welcome a very international audience for today's event, which is an evidence of the increasing global interest in developing digital governance. But before we dive in the fascinating discussion for the next couple of hours, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Erika. I am the Digital Transformation Advisor here in the e-estonia Briefing Center, taking over from our predecessors, Annette and Florian. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen reasons, my colleague, Carmen Raal, Digital Transformation Advisor, who we are working together, is unable to join with me today. No one is safe from the pandemic these days. Luckily, we are in great luck because the e-estonia team members are talented in many fields, aren't we?
Hello from me as well. I must admit that I was at home with COVID until today. So as you can see, we are taking turns over here. And lucky for you that we are able to stand in front of you at the moment. My name is Aret and I'm doing marketing at the Estonia Briefing Center. But indeed, I have doubled my role also as a speaker or digital transformation advisor, if you will. But further without ado, shall we start? Not only do we have people from over 50 countries in our audience, we also have, for the first time ever, invited international digitalization experts to join us. Our keynote speaker of the event, Kaidi Kerli-Kärner, the Strategic Planning Director at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications, is going to share us an insight to the Digital Agenda 2030. And in the first panel, we shall be discussing about digital strategies for several countries, as well as digital or experience about building a digital society. And I have the pleasure to share the stage with our CIO, as well as digitalization experts from the UK and Singapore. Erika, what are we talking in the second panel?
Yes, the second panel will focus on global trends and challenges in digitalization, as well as cross-border cooperation and, of course, collaboration and partnership between private and public sector. I too will have a very big pleasure of hosting the CEO of Estonia, as well as experts from private sector and the OECD. As you can see, we are hosting today some top-notch people, experts from both private sector and public as well. So one rhetorical question remains, and let's hope that we can find the answer at the end of the event today, which is digital the only superpower we really need? But some technical information as well. You do not want to miss all the wonderful knowledge that we are sharing today. So make sure that your internet is really stable because you are attending a live event. However, if any technical problems occur, don't worry because all the event will be recorded as well. And you can watch it again from our YouTube channel, e-estonia.
Yes, and in addition to that, you are at the moment you are on this platform called Workshop. You are able to ask your questions to the panelists at the Q&A session. We have also received many questions beforehand. However, due to the time limit we are not able to cover all of the topics, but we are going to try our best. And now, while today's keynote speaker is coming to the stage, let's watch a quick video.
hi to you on the other side of the screen. We welcome you. My name is Kaidi. I'm the Strategy Director for the Estonian Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications. I'm so happy to share with you the Estonia's plan for this decade and what we are planning to do in terms of digitalization and innovation. We created Digital Agenda 2030 for Estonia. It took a couple of years to set it into stone, so to speak, and we just finalized it last year. I will go through a couple of topics and point out kind of the most interesting and fascinating things that we're planning on doing in the upcoming years. There's also, of course, a lot in there that I will not be able to cover in 15 minutes. So feel free to find it online and go through it and read it yourself. It's a pretty decent document with a lot of topics in there. But what is the vision for the next decade for Estonia? What are we planning on doing? We do have a great experience of 2-3 decades of digitalization here in Estonia. We've done a lot, but there's always room to build another story on this building and keep on going. So what the vision is? The vision for Estonia is that we're full of digital power. So that means that our main goal is to make life as convenient and comfortable for every person inside Estonia or dealing with Estonia as possible. So that means our life is powered by digitalization. It is easy to do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it. We try and want to empower people by valuing every person and their contribution to co-creation. We want to make sure we have fertile foundation so we can create and test out and try new future solutions here in Estonia. If you write something down in an agenda, it's probably not that new anymore. Our goal, our aim is to make sure that we've thought of ways to make sure that any innovation that comes our way, any opportunity out there that comes our way in the upcoming years, that we're prepared for it. When we talk about our laws, when we talk about our technology, our people, knowledge, and so on. So our kind of the agenda's goal is to plan ahead and make sure that we're open to all of that innovation. It's important when we talk about innovation to make sure that we are always protected and our people feel safe in the digital world as well. And anyone communicating with Estonia feels safe and trusts that the information they share is protected. Also, a big part of digitalization is making sure our economy is powerful and takes full advantage of the possibilities we can offer. Our digital agenda kind of lies on 6 principles. So whatever we do, whatever we plan, it should always follow those 6 principles. That we always and foremost protect people's rights. Basic rights coming from our constitution, rights when it comes to data exchange, and so on. We want to cherish Estonian culture and language. Anything digital is basically in English nowadays, but we also want to make sure that everyone who speaks Estonian can access those services in Estonian as well. As I said, it's important for us to maintain our trustworthiness, that when we build things, we build them technology neutral. We build digital society together when we talk about private sector, when we talk about different interest groups, and so on. And we keep being innovative. So what does it mean? In the digital agenda, there are 3 main topics that I will cover now. The biggest and kind of the most substantial in the digital agenda is what has to do with digital government. So how we build for the next decade our government and how we structure and what the innovation there is. It's a very big block of ideas. So I will only share with you here, because we have a limited amount of time, I will only share the kind of 4 very big leaps in the development of digital government. But there's also a lot in the background that has to happen, and that's everything on the slide on the right-hand side, that has to happen in order for that innovation and that leap of development to happen. But the 4 kind of really big things that we're talking about when we talk about digital government in this upcoming decade is life-based and proactive services. Now, I'm a big fan of this. Governments have been building public services very differently, and it was very common, and it still is very common, that people have to know where they have to go if they want a service, if they want to get in touch with the government or local government, if they want to apply for something, they have to know which government agency to talk to or where to go and apply for it. Now, this next step from it would be kind of this one-stop shop idea, that where we gather all the public services into one place, and then a person goes to that place and gets a lot of the services from one place. That's kind of the next step. What we want to do is completely skip that step and go straight to no-stop shop. So where there are no shops to go to, no agencies you have to go to, but all of the public services come to you when you need them. So when you're, for example, getting married and need to change your name, as soon as you get married, the state kind of puts in motion all of that needs to happen for you now that you're married, when it comes to changing your name or any other legal formalities that need to take place. And the government will inform you what you have to do next, when you have to do it, and it's made as easy for you as possible by maybe just one click of a button. So proactive services and life-based services is a very different, fundamentally different way of looking at how public sector offers its services to the citizen. And it also opens up a lot of the resource from the public sector to put those people who would, on a regular day, maybe accept your application, instead of just doing that bureaucratic job, they would have more time to actually go into depth of your maybe different questions, or be available for you on a more fundamental and helpful way. Now, the second big topic is AI-powered government. And what does that mean? There is so much AI can do in the public sector as well. Private sector has been really wonderful at testing out AI. I think public sector has the big role of being courageous enough to trying and testing out AI-powered solutions as well. Estonia is doing that. For example, we just released real-time subtitling in television channels in Estonia, so you don't have to wait for the subtitles and watch your favorite live show day later or 2 days later, wait for the subtitles. You can watch Eurovision Song Contest live with your own native language subtitles in real life, for example. But there are so many wonderful solutions in AI that we can talk about endlessly. Human-centric data development, what we mean there is that Estonia has been really good at sharing data in the public sector. We've shared data across different agencies. We've implemented the once-only principle. But the next leap would be sharing that data with the private sector. So, for example, if I go and see a private doctor, they would get easy access with my permission of course, to my public health records as well, so they can offer me better service. Things like that really require wonderful cooperation between public and private sector, which in Estonia's case, I have a lot of faith in. And the last topic, when it comes to digital government, that's really kind of a leap and a future topic, is green digital government. Now, green digital government is, the green topics are around there, and so many different ways of talking about greening. But what we mean here is not how to use ICT to make other things more green, but how to make ICT itself more green, how to reduce the footprint of ICT itself. And Estonia is a very digital country, how to reduce the footprint we're making with our digital solutions, with the technology, with servers, and so on. So it's kind of a very near future, but still a future topic that Estonia would love to be a leader in. And then, as I said, on the right-hand side on that slide, you can see a lot of that background that needs to happen in order for us to take that next leap when we talk about proactive services or data development or so on. There are two more topics, big topics in the Digital Agenda 2030 of Estonia. There's connectivity. So in order to offer all of this wonderful in-depth solutions, you need to actually have internet. You need to have the connection to use those services and to offer those services. So it is important to keep connectivity up to date. When we talk about the network throughout Estonia, when we're talking about 5G in the future, 6G base network across Estonia. Big challenge for Estonia is to make sure that we have excellent connectivity in our main roads and main pathways for logistics, for example, and transportation. And what may be the future new business services that may arise from the next level connectivity. And the third topic that we cover in the digital agenda is cybersecurity. So what we can say for sure is that the cyber threats continue, the amount of cyber threats and cyber attacks will continue to rise, and their complexity will continue to rise. So our main job is here to make sure that we're up to date when it comes to legal parts, when it comes to the content of cybersecurity, our people, our skills, and so on. I'm not going to go very deep into the metrics or how do we make sure that we're actually achieving this. There are a couple of metrics in the agenda. The main thing is we want to keep our people happy. So the satisfaction of with the public services, e-services Estonia offers has to rise to a whole nother level. Of course, the connectivity has to be good, and the trustworthiness that Estonian people have towards our e-services has to remain as high as it has been so far, which is one of our strengths, that our Estonian people really trust what the government offers them. So there are many hot topics. Some of them I've covered, proactive services, along with them cross-border services. So making sure our digital state and digital country goes cross-border more. So people dealing with Estonia or Estonian locals themselves have access to the most comfortable services, even when they're not in Estonia. I talked about data ownership and, of course, cloud. You can't go anywhere without talking about the future and how we're going to move to the cloud, Estonian government as well. AI, green ICT, data embassy. Now, data embassy is a hot topic as well. We're no longer talking about countries with physical borders. We're talking about our data as well. And if needed, Estonia's main databases are in our data embassy in Luxembourg. So the Estonian state can continue on functioning even if physically we're not able to be in Estonia. I talked about very fast internet across Estonia and cybersecurity. There are a couple of challenges we're facing like any other country, like any other digital country. Maintenance, upkeep, and financing of the country. It takes constant attention. Like anyone, we're facing a challenge finding ICT specialists and maintaining our e-literacy among our people as well. Legal issues, making sure that legal keeps up to date and is very fast in keeping up to date with all of the innovation we want to take place. ICT use in private sector, the challenge about talking about opting in or opting out of the digital state. It's always a conversation and it continues to be a conversation. And I talked about cyber attacks as well. So there are a lot of topics that the agenda covers, and there's a lot of ambition for this decade for Estonia to take the e-country and e-government to the next level. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm open to questions if we have time for them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ms. Kaidi Kerli-Kärner, for introducing the Estonia's Digital Agenda 2030. Before we move on, yes, indeed, I do have some questions, if I may. Living in a world where technology is in rapid change, how easy is it to draft an agenda that needs to serve you for 8 years?
It's a good question. We had this discussion. How can we write a long-term agenda in a field that changes every day? And there are super solutions that really kind of fundamentally change how we do things coming up every year. That's why we didn't really write in the agenda any kind of specific new thing that we'd want to do, but it's more of what can the state do and make sure that if the really wonderful idea comes along, that we're ready for it, that our legal system doesn't stop it or is really willing really fast to move along with it, that we have the great data to offer to any private sector, for example. If they want to offer a great solution, that we can offer our data, of course, securely for usage and so on. So it's more about how we can prepare ourselves as a country to be very agile to any future solutions that come our way.
Have a vision and not describe the tasks. Very
Exactly.
clever. Can you paint us a picture? So if we are going to achieve all the objectives described in this digital agenda, in which Estonia we will live in 2030?
I thought about it quite a lot, and I have to say what I want to see in 2030 is people having a quality relationship with the state, instead of you taking a piece of paper or a digital paper to a government agency saying you want something or need something. The government state already knows what you might need, is there to help you, and has the time to actually go into depth what you need, because all the bureaucracy happens behind doors, and you don't have to deal with it, you don't have to see it. You can be just a person who wants to do something, start a business and so on, and it's as convenient as possible for you. So you don't spend time doing bureaucratic things, and you have access to that anywhere you are in Estonia. And you feel always protected, and that your data is protected. I think that's very important as well.
many of these things you just described already seem to me like the reality. Maybe we are living in the future already in Estonia. Thank you so much, Kaidi Kärner, for sharing this digital agenda with us. Now we are going to move on to the awaited time, and I will hand it over to my colleague Aret, so she can start with the first panel, where along with her guests, they will be discussing the digitalization parts in different countries, the strategies in different countries, and their vision of digital governance in whole. But before, we have one video prepared also for you. One of the core actions or objectives is to implement artificial intelligence more in e-services. And the plans that have already are in piloting mode as we are trying AI since last year. So I'm going to introduce you through this video a creature called bureaucrat. Who is exactly bureaucrat? What does it do? What does it eat? To find out, let's take a look.
Bureaucrat. I'm not sure what there is to talk about, really. What's so special about it anyway? All right. Bureaucrat is merely the official AI-based virtual assistant of Estonia. Honestly, it doesn't do anything that remarkable. Actually, it mostly does completely mundane and sometimes even boring stuff, such as applying for a permit, renewing your identification, or reporting lost documents, applying for family benefits, or borrowing a book for school, standing up for consumer rights, dealing with a fender bender, notifying of vaccinations, identifying mushrooms, and 1,000 other boring things. Now that you've listened to all this, you're probably wondering what you will do with all the free time on your hands. Well, who would know? Who would know?
It's the perfect weather for a day at the beach. I'd recommend taking the electric scooter and hopping on a bus.
With the help of e-Estonia's virtual assistant Bureaucrat, you won't lose any more time solving everyday problems. Pick your preferred device to interact with Bureaucrat and get everything done through one communication channel.
How can I help you?
Welcome to our first panel of the day, From Vision to the New Age Digital Governance. By now, you have already heard about the digital agenda of Estonia for the next few years. And to recap, the three main directions that Estonia is taking is firstly, providing proactive services, one of which you already met, Bureaucrat. Secondly, combining cyber strategy to the digital agenda, which is today, knowing the events we are seeing right now, not only a necessity, but a must. And thirdly, going green. I hope that it's no longer just a buzzword, but both the private and the public sector are actually taking actions on this matter. Now, before I go on, I think it's time to meet our guest speakers in this panel. I'm honored to share the stage with Chief Information Officer of Estonia, Luukas Ilves. And online, we have Mr. Neil Warsop, the Deputy Director at the Government Digital Service from the UK, and Aaron Meniam, the Deputy Secretary at the Ministry of Communications and Information of Singapore. Quick note, going forward, we will address each other with first names. We have agreed on this beforehand. Thank you all for joining us. I would actually like to start with a question to both Neil and Aaron, since we already had an overview of the digital agenda of Estonia. Very briefly, can you describe and give us an overview of your country's strategies for the next few years? And what are the main transformation aspects going forward? Neil, let's start with you.
Thanks, Arets. Okay, at GDS, our mission is to build a simple, joined up and personalised experience of government for everyone. Using our unique position at the centre of government, we'll develop services that work better for the user. We actually have 5 missions, and I'll just describe these briefly for you. The first is gov.uk, making that single and trusted online destination for government information and services. And second is having joined up services that solve whole problems and span multiple departments. Some people only need to access government services a few times per year. However, there are millions of people who have complicated and busy lives and need lots of help from government. For these users, our services appear tremendously siloed and difficult to navigate. So to fix this, we'll build a gov.uk account and create a single sign-on for all services. Our third mission is a simple identity solution that works for everyone. Our fourth mission is creating common tools and expert services. We talked a lot about the UK has our successors in digital transformation from online tax to MOT. However, many citizens experience services that are not quite as good. So we want to fix the long tail and transform the long tail as well. For example, removing PDF forms. We also want to ensure existing platforms are well maintained and that we have capability to support transformation across government. Our last mission, mission 5, is on joined up data across departments.
Thank you. And Neil and Aaron?
All of you. Tallinn is one of my favorite places in the world, and I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person. In Singapore, a lot of what we do is not different hugely from what Kaidi and Neil have described. We have what we call the Smart Nation Initiative, which our Prime Minister launched 8 years ago, and he remains one of the biggest champions for digitalization of the economy, of society, and of government. Today, I wanted to talk about 4 big priorities, since you mentioned you'd like to focus on what the core aspects are in our strategy. And I've kind of summarized them in 4 I words, which help us to remember things, I hope. The first I is that we are focused very much on improving lives, right? We're not interested in the adoption of technology for its own sake, but it needs to make a genuine difference in the lives of citizens and businesses and the users of these digital services. And that means we've tried to make sure that the digitalization has been pervasive, right, across things like e-payments, COVID response, smart meters, even our libraries are digitalizing, and making sure that our economy is digitalizing in that process. The way we shop, the way we entertain, the way we work has continually been changing, and we're very keen that these new business and living models continue to evolve. So we're very focused, first of all, on that I of improvement. The second I is infrastructure and the regulation of that infrastructure. We think that is particularly critical because when you have the right regulations in place, that's when you have the right guardrails and enablers to ensure that we can digitalize at the right pace, right? To make sure that we can go fast in order to improve the lives that we're interested in. The same way cars have handbrakes, right? And that friction allows bicycles to move in the best possible way. We want to make sure that digitalization has the right regulations in place to make sure that we take care of digital security, as well as to make sure that we consider the cybersecurity, as well as the broader social security issues that are so necessary necessary in this day and age. We want to take care of issues like online falsehoods, online safety, and ensure that our most vulnerable communities, children, women, are well protected against the online harms that might exist. Another area where we think the right regulations are critical is to have the adequate personal data protection and privacy rules to ensure that we can actually seize the opportunities of digitalization in tandem with our own societal norms and our societal sentiments. The third I is the importance of individuals, right? We think it's really important that there be a continual focus on each individual being part of the digitalization process and that they don't feel alienated. This means that they need to be included and that digital access and inclusion programs are key. It means that people need to be catering to services that are as user-centric as possible so that they all feel part of the digitalization process. And it means building up human capital, right? The skills, the knowledge, the experience that every individual needs to play meaningfully in the digital space, whether they are doing ICT jobs or whether they are doing jobs that contribute using ICT as an enabler and a set of tools. Everybody, we think, needs to be involved as meaningfully as possible in that process. And finally, the fourth I is innovation. We need to be continually evolving and agile so that we keep pace with the ways in which technology is changing and the ways in which the dynamic evolution of the digital space is happening. And we think if we combine these, right, that can focus on improvements, on infrastructure, on individuals, and on innovation, that we'll be able to have a really rich and constantly evolving for the better overall smart nation system.
Perfect. I really like the ambition for the future, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of challenges that we also have to face when we have all those big plans. A question for everyone: what do you think are going to be the biggest challenges ahead of us? I think let's start with Luukas over here.
Thank you, Edith. And Aaron, Neil, good to see you. Good evening, and I guess good afternoon for Neil. I think that there are a couple of places as I'm taking over from my predecessor Siim that I'm looking at where we still have quite a lot of work to do. Estonians like to talk about our interoperability, our electronic identity, the things that we do well around the technology and the infrastructure. But when we look at the user centricity and really the extent to which the way we design services, it is not keeping pace with the way that at least the best parts of the private sector, the most innovative companies, are doing so. I also think we have a lot to learn here from how you, in particular, Neil, at GDS, have done things over the last decade, because you really made user centricity a real focal point. And we've got some places of excellence there, but we need to be more consistent. The second challenge relates to that technological basis, which is legacy. A lot of what we've done is now 20 years old. And the literal technology may not be 20 years old, but the architecture, the design is. And so if we're looking at the future of identity, interoperability, how we access data today, well, data is a good example. Big data 20 years ago was a millionth of what we're talking about today, given the doubling that we've had just about every year in the volumes of data we're processing. And the last challenge is a paradoxical one. Digital as a concept should disappear into the background. At the end of the day, what should be motivating us are the business goals of government. And those are going to be measured in things like GDP, healthcare, even something as abstract as happiness. And so I think we have to start doing a better job at how we view digitization as a tool that supports the various business goals of government. And we do that well in some places, but in others we have quite a ways to go.
Would you like to add anything to it, Neil or Aaron?
Sure. I agree with a lot of what Luukas has said there. I mean, I think the user need focus in GDS and in the UK has been great, but it's still need to go wider into the rest of government. And as we talk about the long tail here, so service transformation beyond some of the key high-profile services that we've seen improve a lot. We've also got to focus a lot on capability. There's a huge demand for digitally capable people, both in the public and private sector. So recruiting people for government, is always a priority as well. Tackling legacy, data, and a specific thing in the UK, creating a single digital identity service is a priority here too.
I think I very much agree with what Luukas and Neil have said. I suspect we're all facing very similar challenges as reasonably similar digitalization systems. I talked about 4 I's in our strategy. When I think about the challenges, the way I think of it and summarize it is in 4 A's. First of all, it's the problem of access. I think we continually will need to be pushing the digitalization agenda, but at the same time ensuring that those who don't have access have other options, right? So how do we ensure that those who need it have, say, paper access, but ensure that that doesn't become a crutch, right? And that is genuinely a last resort for those to use when they need it, but that it doesn't then slow down the overall transformation process. So I think access and the equity of that access will continue to be challenges for all digitalizing systems. I think then encouraging adoption will be critical. There will always be the change management process of dealing with the first 95% who usually come on board relatively quickly. When you pay your taxes fast, that's where you get most of the people. But the last 5% will often involve some amount of resistance and some amount of inertia. So we have to figure out ways to bring that last mile in. And in Singapore, actually, for some of those last miles, the COVID-19 pandemic provided a huge amount of impetus for people to finally, get on board with things like e-commerce and finally learn to use more digital apps so that they could stay in touch with their families, because otherwise there just wasn't that option during the period of what we called our circuit breaker, which is similar to the lockdowns in other parts of the world. The third A is adaptation, right? Once people have adopted, they also need to then think about how their lives are actually going to change and how this is not just the tactical adoption of technology, but people are actually changing the fundamental nature of how we operate. This applies as much to us in government as it applies to everyone else. We have to use technology to think about how we change the nature of our work rather than simply take the old work and transpose it into the digital space. The last thing is what I would call agility, right? The importance of continually transforming ourselves as individuals and the economy and our business models, as well as society at large, to make sure that we keep pace with digital change. And this is where I think some of the talent constraints and the shortages that Neil mentioned become particularly important, because we can only be as agile as each of us is able and skilled to do. And if we don't have that skill base, then actually we will face more challenges in the future.
I heard this word legacy coming out from this discussion now. We have come a long way as countries, and right now the world is seeing us as pioneers and looking at us, what are we doing next? But it wasn't always the case. It all started with a vision. Do you think, or what do you think, how much has the vision itself changed over time? And how do you keep focused and stay innovative? Because I know for a fact that in here at the briefing center, we are always being asked, what's next? And the expectations for the governments are really high. Aaron, Luukas, how would you comment on it? Like, how much has it changed and so on?
Well, I'd say in Estonia's case, at least, expectations are both the biggest driver and the biggest challenge we have. I mean, you saw some of the, in Kaidi's presentation, you saw some of the numbers. The approval numbers, as it were, for our digital government, they're okay, but they're not fantastic. 69% of individual users are happy with services, 47% of businesses. I'm not sure it's because what we do is bad, but it's because we have really high expectations amongst our users. And our users really do look at our government services and they ask, why is this not as good as what my online bank is providing me, as what Apple is providing me? And so that drives us. But it also, sometimes will put us in more of a negative defensive loop where we have to be explaining why one or another sort of system hasn't been updated, is slow. I think keeping up with expectations, once we set those positive expectations, is really valuable. I think there are a lot of countries across the world where you have the opposite problem, which is people basically don't have positive expectations for government. They've kind of resigned themselves to poor digital services in the public sector. But there's also a risk of those expectations being, too high at times.
Mm-hmm. What's the case in Singapore? I know that there are similar different kind of services in place over there, and you're using different solutions. What's the situation over there in your country in terms of vision?
It's a great question, Aret. It's a great question, because I think legacy is something that will always affect systems, right? Clayton Christensen used to write about what he called the innovator's dilemma, right? Where we will always face a situation where after you have succeeded, it becomes much harder to innovate because the costs of innovating are much greater. The costs of abandoning success and changing it are also greater, because if the new experiment happens to fail, then there's a huge criticism that can apply. And we found that, at the moment we work from a high base, right? 97% of our pass account, right? So that's a user base of more than 4.4 million users for the core digital service that enables interoperability across different parts of the government. We have a lot of SingPass. We have different methods that allow people to get in if they find that they don't all want to use exactly the same method. We've got the most commonly used, which is the SingPass app. Others prefer to use SMS, one-time passwords. Others people prefer facial verifications. We try and create that variety so that the user experience can be diverse across sure that we are responding to actual user needs rather than what we think are the user needs. And this means having a really radical design approach. It means continually not just thinking about our users, but talking to them, watching their behavior, finding out what is their pain point, what is their pleasure point, and then designing and iterating over and over again in response to those user needs. I find that when we do that, then actually the overall government services can continually respond to what Luukas described, right, as this feedback. But we're not waiting for surveys to give us once a year feedback. We're iterating in real time and finding that as we get enough data, we can keep updating the system. So I think what I would say is that when governments are dealing with legacy, we need to approach that legacy with a very experimental and a prototyping mindset. And the more we can conduct little experiments, get feedback, and adjust what we do in response to that feedback, then the stronger our overall design will be, and the less lengthy the legacy becomes, right? Because we're changing in real time and as we go along. And the more we do that, the more we don't allow for the legacy to set in and become an inertial force in our overall evolution.
Can I ask Aaron a question? Sure.
It's one thing for you to do that, right? And I think the challenge I'm trying to wrap my head around right now is how do I get 12 different departments across government and many agencies to have that mindset shift, right? To go from static measurement to constant A/B testing, even, never mind just sort of keeping ongoing dynamic stats. Have you had any sort of magical tricks or silver bullets to really create that service design mindset shift?
Luukas, I wish there was a silver bullet. If there was, then you and I could try and patent it, right? But unfortunately, there isn't. I think what this really requires is a sense of will, grit, and determination in a system. And one thing we've benefited from is the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, the Prime Minister is deeply supportive of the Smart Nation process, and that means that there is a certain amount of attention that gets paid to agency's own transformation. What we've also done is identified people who are the strategic leaders of digital transformation in every agency family. We call them chief digital strategy officers, and they're very often the deputy secretary in a ministry that then looks after a cluster of operational agencies, and they are the ones responsible for going around and doing a bit of nagging and saying, we need to digitize this, you've got to use more data here, you've got to iterate this a little bit better, your user experience and this is not particularly great. And so these chief digital strategy officers supervise what we call ministry family digitalization plans, right? And these plans are quite useful because it allows for the different agencies to not just come up with what they want to do over the next 2 or 3 years, but it allows them to share and learn from one another what has worked, what has not worked. So that sense of good or best practice being shared is actually very powerful. We also periodically train all our chief digital strategy officers together in the kinds of work that need to happen. And again, that conversation that can happen amongst them at the strategic level of what is working versus what is not, then allows them to take back those lessons and in a way stand on the shoulder of giants, right? Because they don't have to repeat the errors that others have done, and they can build from the successes instead.
Mm-hmm. And I would actually like to turn my next question to Neil, since Estonia and Singapore, we both have very an electronic identity in place for a while now, but I know that in the UK, it's not exactly the case over there. In 2020, UK came out, published their plans about a comprehensive digital ID program over there. Do you know what's the alternative over there? Because I know that in Estonia, when we have a physical card, it's rather outdated. So it is recommended by the experts to find a more advanced solution. Singapore has a SingPass. What's your goal, and what is the something that you are building over there?
Sure, thanks. I was just thinking about my response to the legacy question, actually. But standards, by the way, is what we've approached with here on that one. So on single identity, yes, the context is different because, as you say, we don't have an ID card. There's been lots of debate over that over the years, probably over decades now. I think the thrust on the digital identity program for us is that we want to build a simple, joined up, personalised experience of government for everyone. And it's a key commitment of our reform agenda now, and it will deliver a better focus, a better outcome for citizens. And we also think that economic benefits of having that digital identity are massive as well. And as in GDS, being in our unique position at the centre of government, we want to develop a service that works for users and service teams across government too. We want to remove unnecessary complexity. We want to make sure we're developing an inclusive and accessible way for people to log on to services. And users who need to prove their identities in order to access these services will be able to use it, including the vulnerable and those without common documents. We've been doing a lot of work and discoveries over the last 7 months or so, and we're combining expertise of people in GDS, but also people in departments. We're going to co-design a solution. We're going to try and build as much of it ourselves as possible, but we're in the process of procuring a partner too. So it's one solution that works for all services, but I think it's difficult at this stage to say exactly what it is. We're still, a long way down the journey through kind of looking at verify solution early on and changing tack to where we are now, but it's difficult to say explicitly what we're doing, but the principles are clear, I think, for us.
It sounds as if all the three countries are actually experimenting a lot, taking risks, because we never know if we are going to have a good or a bad idea, right? I listened to a podcast with Seth Godin over the weekend, and I felt like there was this idea that applied to building a digital governance, because he said that in order to find a good idea, you would have to come up with as many bad ideas as possible. And I find that this is what all of us are doing as well. So what do you think? How much can we risk though? Like, especially, for example, when Singapore and Estonia, we have built this digital society, and we wouldn't want to risk of losing people's trust anymore because we have built it along the way. So has people's risk tolerance changed in time, or?
I can say for a fact, the risk tolerance of the people building government services in Estonia has probably gone down compared to what it was in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, Aaron already talked about the innovator's dilemma, and I think we're very cognizant of the fact that with the same sort of 95% penetration user base we have, that is a really important asset that we can't lose. We don't want people turning away and sort of withdrawing from digital government. And so in some senses, we have to think the same way that very risk-averse regulated industries do, which is that failure isn't an option. And there are some things you can do to mitigate those risks. And probably the biggest one ultimately is transparency. And that includes transparency about your failures. I mean, one of the things we've done when we've had security incidents, when we've really screwed up, is to be very frank and forward about it. And that creates a confidence that if you do have a failure, it's not going to get hidden. Citizens are going to know about it. And that gives you, that generally engenders a confidence to basically give you a second chance. And I think that's what we sort of have to deal with. It's ultimately not how do we avoid a failure on a technical level, it's how do we ensure that those technical failures that are inevitable don't become systematic trust failures in the people behind digital government.
Unfortunately, we have run over time right now, but I have one quick question. I would like to have one keyword from each of you. If you could recommend something to those countries who are only in the beginning of this journey, in one word, what would you tell them? What kind of recommendation would you give them? Neil, let's start with you.
User needs, focus. Sorry, not one word.
Aaron?
I would say that it's about people. It's focusing on people to get the right talent, to get the right skills, but then also focusing on people in terms of the users. So people, always about people.
Yeah. Well, since they already took my favorite words, I'll just add one, which is a fifth I, iterate. And if we're going with letters, we could also have the fifth A, which is Aaron, but you know.
Perfect. So now.
And Neil, I'm really not picking on you because Aaron didn't give us 4 N's. If Aaron can give us 4 N's, you can be the 5th.
We still have 5 more minutes though, so that we can also see what are the people asking from our panelists. So there is this one question. How to justify implementing digital infrastructures? Is there a way how governments actually measure the success of or impact of digitalization? And are we only talking about hours or time saved? Hours or finances saved? Or would you bring out some other aspects that are in favor of implementing a digital governance as such? Aaron, sorry, Luukas.
Well, look, people's time saved and bureaucratic time saved, the money is sort of the obvious measures. I'd say at the end of the day, it's all the business measures of government we're talking about, right? So it depends a bit on the service, but health, wisdom, financial success for businesses, GDP growth. I mean, there's not one metric across all of digital government, but I want the healthcare people to be really maximizing the healthcare metrics, right? I want the people who are running my education system to be maximizing for, well, what's the wisdom and the empathy that they're engendering in our citizenship as we all are educated and so forth. So it's all the KPIs of government, the dozens of them.
Mm-hmm. Neil, Aaron?
I'd love to build on that, actually, Aret. I'll build on that because I agree very much with Luukas. I think we need to focus a lot on the effectiveness of the systems that we have in place. What you call the business goals of government, right, Luukas? I think we're having to build on that. And if we do those better with digitalization, then that is a mark of digitalization being successful. So we need to get better at measuring ourselves according to the standards that we have set. I would add to that 2 other things. One, we need to measure usage and usability of all of our digital services. And that means knowing that the stuff we put out there is not just hypothetical in the benefits it's creating, but is actually doing genuine things to go back to the users, right, and designing for them, as Neil pointed out. And then the third thing, which is really not sexy, but super important, is data security. Right? We need to make sure that the data, as well as the security of the systems themselves, is there, right? In a lot of ways, we've all embarked on these journeys, and we will all at some point have issues with data security, right? I mean, Estonia had your attacks in 2007. In Singapore, we had a massive cyber breach and exfiltration exercise on some of our healthcare records in 2018. And we learn from those, right? We learn in ways that have allowed us to make our data security systems better than they've been before. But I think data security and the occurrence of breaches, the ability to respond to those breaches quickly, that is a major way in which we should evaluate the success of our systems as well.
Would you have anything to add, Neil?
Sure. Feels a bit like preaching to the choir with my panel colleagues. I think whilst measurement of digitization and success started as a sort of efficiency driver, I agree with a lot of what's being said around, how do we measure sort of user satisfaction? Talking with my leadership team colleagues this morning, we're talking about coming up with metrics for the next phase. On gov.uk, we've got a 98% brand recognition and obviously wanted to be a trusted source. We get a lot of traffic each week as well. So actually coming up with a broad and balanced kind of range of metrics is key, really, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, everyone. I think the main keywords that really caught my ear today was people, consistency, security, and yeah, we just have to focus and I think keep going forward. But now, before I give the floor to Erika, let's take a look at the next introduction video to her panel discussion.
Sunrise. We trust this to happen every morning. Each day in a bit different way. And in each country of the world at a different time. But it is always there to greet the new day. The way it lights up the roads and bridges that connect people is amazing. The same roads we walk step by step on every day to go to work or pick up our kids from kindergarten, and the bridges we cross to get to each other. The infrastructure of the 21st century is already a masterpiece. But it is not only about roads and bridges, but ever more about the ways we collect, transfer, and store data. We as humans have the power to manage data, control it, share it, pass it forward and collect it back again from new heights, create order on its playground. And this is a privilege, it's a responsibility, an honor, because this builds our digital tomorrow. And by empowering it, we map the digital future of our children, so they could live in a world where digital networks are human-centric, like-minded countries share and exchange data daily. Digital ecosystems are borderless and based on constant learning. Synergy exists between science, information technology, and policy for innovation to succeed. Investments in those systems, services, and infrastructure are future-proof, and we have the power to face even worldwide pandemic with digital unity that makes a difference. This is trusted connectivity. Every sunrise lights new opportunities to take it to the next level. Today is no exception.
I welcome you to tune in for the second panel of the day with the headline, "There are no boundaries or borders in the digital age." I found one thought from the video really beautiful. We trust roads and bridges when we want to get to each other. So how can we stand in unity virtually as well? What kind of digital society we're going to live for the generations to come? In search of the collaborative spirit of the new digital age, I have a very big honor to host three extraordinary people to help me break the boundaries and the borders. So without further ado, next to me I have Mr. Luukas Ilves, the Government Chief Information Officer of Estonia.
Good afternoon.
And Mr. Oliver Värtnö, the CEO of Cybernetica, the company that has had a leading role in developing the backbone of the Estonian digital state, the X-Roads. Welcome.
Thank you.
And joining us on the screen, we have Ms. Barbara Ubaldi, the Head of Digital Government and Data Unit at the OECD. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us here today. To make the introduction and to the topic of private-public partnership on an international scale, I will ask Barbara, you to help to set us the theme. Could you please describe the main trends in challenges and priorities of OECD countries that you are currently seeing in the e-governance field?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you also for having us here. It's a real pleasure on behalf of the OECD. And hi, Luukas. Very nice to meet you virtually. Estonia has been, as a member country, a leading example on what governments have been doing on digital around the world, and happy to keep looking after the priorities that you set for the digital agenda of Estonia. I think the pandemic has clearly demonstrated the key role that governments can play in leading the way, in taking decisions on the use of digital technologies and data, which are value-based and which somehow are sustainable in the long run. We always think of governments as running behind the private sector. I think that the pandemic imposed on governments the going online or the transfer online of entire public sectors. This was unprecedented as an effort that was expected from government, and unprecedented was a level of expectations that some of the speakers in the previous session also mentioned in terms of reactiveness, capacity of governments to respond to the needs of citizens as new needs were emerging, but also as core services needed to be provided with continuity. So I think that what we saw was that governments that could be capable to use digital tools and data, therefore were more prepared, more digitally mature to keep providing continuity in the service delivery, were the ones that somehow felt they were more capable to respond to these expectations. But we also saw that there has been a great acceleration in the adoption of digital tools and in creating environments that enable governments to use data to be able to keep functioning in an agile manner. So what do we see as being the main challenges and priorities for governments at the moment? First of all, the pandemic and the acceleration demonstrated the need for governments to be able to take sound decisions on digital investments, which means being able, for example, to be strategic on how the value proposition on investments is formulated across the administration, on how money is spent, so how services and goods are procured in ways that are agile, on how the projects are then implemented and results are being monitored. Oftentimes, all these steps are not connected. Therefore, we don't think about digital investments as a chain of decisions, but we see these actions as isolated from each other. The second priority is around skills. So the type of talent and skills that we need to have across all levels of civil service, starting from having the right CIO, the right decision maker with the right profile, that needs to have multidisciplinary teams helping him or her out, but also having the right talent and skills across the whole administration. That does not mean only having people who know about data and digital, but people who can, for example, foster the more proactive provision of services, which is based and driven by the needs of users that Luukas was also mentioning as part of the priority agenda for Estonia. Third, we need to have the right governance in place. That's a priority. That means not only having the right leaders in place that I just mentioned, but also having the right mechanisms in place that enable people to coordinate, that enable to bring down silos. I will quote a colleague from a member country in a leading digital position who said we need to hack bureaucracy. If we really want to achieve the digital transformation, we need to be able to coordinate and to cut across silos. So to conclude, as we saw in the Digital Government Index, that was launched a couple of years ago and will come up with a new edition in 2022 in the OECD. And based on our digital government framework, what we see is that governments have become more digital by design. They are becoming more open by default. They are focusing on being able to provide tools and guidelines that enable to operate as a platform, but they still need to make efforts to be more data-driven, to be more proactive, and to be more user-driven.
Exactly, thank you. Oliver, I'm going to move now completely to the private sector. And can you share from Cybernetica's experience in Estonia and globally as well, building the e-governance solutions? Where is your focus today? Is there something holding you back? and what is it?
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, I would like to kind of reiterate what Barbara said, is that I also see that the COVID crisis has really sped up the digitalization of governments or societies, and there is more and more cures coming into Estonia, to Estonian companies to help governments digitalize. But in the background of all this, I must say that no country or every country is different. Each country has its own challenges up ahead. You cannot take what we have built here in Estonia and copy it in other countries. You can learn from the lessons that we have. That's what I tell to all of my customers or all our potential customers, is we can show you what we have done here in Estonia, and we can transform that experience to your local context by changing the technology, adopting the technologies to your culture, to your rules and regulations, organizational structures, etc., etc. But when looking at why people come to Estonia, why they come to Cybernetica, then I think there are kind of three main reasons that we are addressed. First of all, when we look at developing countries, they come to Estonia and they are looking for new technologies to create efficiency, to create new capabilities to their citizens, to their economies, etc. So they are looking for research and development intensive solutions that bring new capabilities or efficiencies. Secondly, what I see people coming to Estonia for is, when they look at our society, they look at, okay, how have you achieved that trust in ICT technologies? What is the model behind achieving that trust? And that's a very, very complicated, very complicated discussion, and there is usually no good answer to that. There are aspects that they can use, but it's not definitely anything that can be copied one-on-one. And the third kind of characteristics why governments or organizations are coming to Estonia is they're actually coming for the developing story. How did Estonia grow so fast? Obviously, you're known as a digital nation. If we digitalize as you did, can we achieve the same growth? So these are the kind of three, I think, main drivers that organizations, governments come to look at here in Estonia, and that we try to accommodate into our value proposition.
Yeah, the trust topic was really, really important that you mentioned. Hopefully we can come back to it and really find the answers to it and not leave it just pending. And now, Luukas, we are extremely privileged to have you here, coming from the private sector to now being the government CIO currently. Please share your unique insight. How easy was it to get the public and private sector stakeholders to sound together in symphony in Estonia? And is partnership with government simply business as usual for the companies, or do you really have to change the mindset to collaborate? So,
if we go back to the early days of e-government in Estonia, it very much was a public-private partnership where the design and sometimes also the business models around operation were built jointly. But I think that as technology has evolved, our ability to think about the different types of relationships and roles we have between public and private also changes. And I want to talk about 2 or 3 technologies that in turn are also driving business model changes. Now, one of those is cloud, right? And people think about cloud and they say, oh, that's an interesting database technology. But the real business model innovation in cloud is that you actually are able to encapsulate changes to business models, organizational structures into a piece of software. So if I today subscribe to Pipedrive, which is a piece of CRM software, it's not just a bunch of code that I'm getting. I'm also getting the design, the service design, the support to carry out a transformation in how the sales process works in my company or my organization. And government doesn't today, for instance, think about sales processes very much. We've struggled to get people in government to be more customer and client facing. Might be that cloud services that salespeople use brought into government might help that transformation, as an example. So cloud not just as a driver of technological, but really as business process change. Second technology is blockchain. Still early days here, but blockchain is a way of creating distributed trust and information about ongoing processes. So one of the hopes with blockchain is that we can use that, and we can use sort of trust technologies more generally to make it possible for government, which ultimately has a task of ensuring an outcome, to achieve that outcome and mandate that outcome without actually having to be involved directly in the service provision. Basically allow government to step back, create markets, create layers of encoding digital assets, of supervising goods, products, and services, and really be the supervisor and the market organizer instead of itself being responsible for providing services. And there's a third really important, well, I hesitate to call it a technology, but a paradigm change, which is around data, which again creates the information for government to be able to understand how those outcomes have been achieved without always being in the role of providing services itself. And so what we see is that technologies like big data, blockchain, and cloud are also tools that allow us to increase the role of the private sector in actually providing public services or being responsible for them. And what I would hope we can talk about in the coming decade around public-private partnerships is actually how government can make the private sector responsible for some of the things it does very well. So one of the things that all governments have struggled with is user interface. And that's simply because we're monopolists, right? We don't have that fire in our belly to win the next customer in a way that competing customer-facing private sector companies do. So how do we bring private sector competition into areas of service provision that have really traditionally been monopolistic areas of government? I won't give you any easy answers, but I think that those are places where the right deployment of new technologies can help us with that change.
Exactly. So let's take the best expertise from the public and from the private sector and try to combine them in the best possible way. And Estonia has a pretty successful experience, yes, in private public partnership in building the e-solutions historically. So I wonder if there is a collaboration point also somewhere globally where different stakeholders from the private sector and public sector can come together. And Barbara, as OECD member countries are committed to identify good practices and coordinate also international policies among of the other collaborative activities. So what importance would you draw on the synchronizing digitalization strategies between countries?
This is a very key question. First of all, we really see in the adoption of digitalization strategies as a key milestone towards the more mature digital government development. A strategy is what, as a core element of the government, helps the government define the vision, setting the strategic goals, but also helps identifying the roadmap to get to the results that the government wants to achieve, which, like the other panelists, I think Oliver was saying, need to be customized to the context of the specific country and in order to make the results sustainable. Now, having said this, because a strategy is very important to steer decision, to align actions to the strategic goals, to coordinate, integrate, find synergies, and also to identify responses that bring value to the citizens and to the businesses. I think it's absolutely a necessity for governments to align strategic goals across borders. I think that there are agendas that within the European Union have emerged as necessary agendas, particularly during the pandemic, around cross-border services, around data. So the access and sharing of data with trust clearly across borders needs to be, in my view, a priority, a shared priority of digitalization strategies across borders, and digital identity. I think that this has been a priority for the Commission for quite a few years, I would say for some decades. This has become a priority for countries around the world outside of the European Union as well. And I think this is essential because it points to a key word that I think is around interoperability. Interoperability of decision-making processes, interoperability of data, interoperability of systems. And I think this is the big value that can be brought by synchronizing digital strategies or digitalization agendas across borders. I think that the travel certificate that was produced for European citizens has been the biggest demonstration of how, if we join up strategic actions and goals across borders, we really can bring the value to the citizens and to the users of the services.
Yes, exactly. And I'm going to take on Oliver's word here before when he said that lots of countries are coming to us or to Cybernetica for consultation. And instead, I'm going to ask this question from Luukas with this question that many of our viewers are sending to us. How can Estonia be the international partner for many countries, either in Asia or in Africa or in South America? So is it possible to transfer our advanced digital society to these countries?
So I think transfer is the wrong word. There are two thoughts. One is merely a question of setting ambitions. I think one of the things we encounter very frequently is that you need to actually have the political will and also the more sort of bureaucratic and operational will to carry out transformation. And the role that sort of positive examples play there aren't necessarily one of providing you a template to copy one-to-one, but of providing inspiration, providing ideas, and giving you the confidence to know that actually those transformations are possible, that a 0 to 1 shift is possible. And beyond that, while I don't think you can copy an entire system lock, stock, and barrel, I think the transfer of individual technologies, products, and services very much is possible. One of the things that's really exciting that's happening in digital government right now is we're going from a world of systems integrators, large custom one-off systems, into, as the private sector has gone through in the last 10, 20 years, much more standardized products and services. So the whole field of GovTech is about bringing the same sort of innovative spirit of startups, but also the consumption models of using cloud-based services, having more standardized components into the public sector. So I think one of the things we need to think about as government, and this is true in Estonia, but it's also then true for thinking about how things built in Estonia could be transferred elsewhere, could also find customers elsewhere. How do we actually consume digital government components and services in a way that doesn't mean that they're unique products that can't be consumed and used elsewhere, but that we actually are specifying, via APIs, via standards, the same types of products and services for healthcare in Estonia as healthcare in Uruguay or healthcare in India. That the way in which we think about digital identity and building up the technology stack allows the components that are used here to be used elsewhere and deployed elsewhere.
Yeah, I see Oliver nodding here a lot. Do you have anything to add to what Luukas said in terms of where do you see this international collaboration happening or this cross-border governance happening? Are there any good solutions, or do you see hurdles very clearly in the path?
I see, first of all, a lot of cooperation on the strategic level when governments are developing their e-government strategies or digitalization strategies. There is definitely a lot of knowledge exchange between the governments. It's also been disseminated by OECD, European Commission, and all other international organizations. In regards to hardcore joint public service provision, I think what Estonia did with Finland when we both decided to share our extra infrastructures was kind of one-off thing in the world. I haven't seen two countries to come together on that level, that we actually provide via the same infrastructure, the same services, whether it's in the healthcare domain or business registry, business domains, etc., etc. Now, with what has happened with COVID, and that I come back to the point that Barbara was making, COVID has really pushed the European Commission to develop the digital single market. First of all, through the COVID pass, Europe was really surprised that we could create this kind of joint infrastructure, this joint interoperability between COVID certificates, and that these can be shared across borders, etc. And what I see now, the Commission is really strongly pushing on European-wide digital identity, which is a very kind of unique way of looking at digital identity based on a wallet infrastructure. Let's see how far the Commission is going with that infrastructure, whether it will be able to implement it. But it is definitely something that will stand out in the world as something that is done on that large scale, with so many countries behind it. But we also see some collaboration aspects also in Africa, where they are working on standardization, on data interoperability, providing also cross-border services, whether it's for transport, logistics, etc., etc. So I think gradually the world is becoming more and more united in bringing these services, but I think today Europe is in the forefront of these discussions.
Well, I see the future of interoperability in very bright colors indeed. When we are considering the cross-border governance, that inevitably includes the interoperable data exchange, and you, Barbara, already briefly touched upon it. The possible benefits of interoperability is really easy to predict. The seamless consumption of e-services and the extra benefits gained for the end user, who is the citizen. But let's discuss the underlying principles of the data exchange. So Barbara, how can you comment from the OECD perspective? What are the essentials when dealing with data management, and not only to seem transparent, but to actually practice transparency as well? And in the midst of all of this, how we can make the lives better for the citizen instead of just turning it digital?
Yeah, thank you. That's, again, another key question, because I think that it's not because we have data available, it's not because we utilize digital tools that we necessarily bring the value and the trustworthy value to the citizens and to the businesses. So if we think about data management from a national perspective, and I think that the three of us have underlined the importance of data as a key core element of any digital transformation, I think we need to think about a management that produces results that have an impact on people and produces results in a trustworthy way. Therefore, there are three main set of actions that, in our view, need to be taken, and they need to be seen as part of the same framing of the conversation. First of all, data governance. Data governance that needs to take into account strategic decisions, but also the operational implementation. So on one side, data governance is about having a strategy, a single strategy for the whole public sector adopted by the government. Is about having stewards, for example, across the different public sector agencies or institutions. So it's not enough to have a single chief data officer, but how do you permeate a culture of data-driven approaches across the whole administration? But it's also about having the right regulations in place that guarantee privacy and security and also accessibility to data across the public sector. And last but not least, is also about having the right skills of the people that support a more data-driven approach, but also having the guidelines, the standards, that make sure that we have, for instance, interoperability of data, which is also semantic interoperability, and that we all think of data as a key strategic asset, and we use data as a key strategic asset across the whole public sector. The second element is that we need to keep in mind that if data is not used to produce value, then value is not produced for the citizens. So how can we really be very strategic in thinking how data can help us anticipate needs, can help us bring more concrete value through specific services, through specific application, through specific solutions? Now can we best use data to also innovate how we monitor the performance of government? And last but not least, what kind of ethical measures need to be put in place, or what kind of framework needs to be put in place to make sure that data is utilized in an ethical manner? So not only ethical, meaning protecting security and privacy, but we know that the more we use AI, the more we use data. How can we make sure that the choice of data is not leading to biased end decisions or to biased policies? So it's really very important to make sure the data chosen to also inform AI use is covering needs across the whole society, so produces results that are more inclusive. So we really think that also there's a big space for opening up data that help create partnerships with the civil society, with the private sector, to co-create solutions. But this needs to be done in a trustworthy way. And for this to happen, there's also the big importance of setting the framework for securing that, again, for example, consent, the consent option is given to citizens in relation to the use that is done about their own data by the different part of the public sector. So transparency means also being more open in terms of sharing information on the use done with data that belong to individuals, for example.
Very good, Barbara, that you touched on the trust issue, because here in the briefing center, we also get asked a lot, why do we trust our government so much? So do we blindly trust the government, or do we trust the government too much? Luukas, from Estonia's experience, describe please very briefly how Estonia has solved the trust question.
I don't think we've solved the trust question. I think we've done some things that are helpful with the trust question, and we keep on working on the trust question. One of the things, we talked about this briefly in the first panel, is that we're incredibly transparent we're transparent on the technical level, right? And this is sort of one of the things we like to talk about around letting people see how their data has been used. That's been something we've done on a limited basis so far, and we're now putting a real big effort into making that a universal component of how data is used everywhere in government. And we're making the code available on an open source basis so it can be reused by the private sector, so they can also give users transparency into how their data is being used, and part of that allows us in turn via APIs to open up citizens' own data to be shared with the private sector based on consent, so that you can, for instance, reuse your government data in private services. But there's a different layer of transparency beyond the kind of technological data use transparency that I think is equally, if not more important, and that is organizational and human transparency, because the technical systems and the technology we have will fail. It hopefully won't fail frequently if we've done our job well, but it's inevitable that there will be failures. And then the question becomes, how do you react to that failure? What is the political message? What is the human message to the users of the service that's failed, to the users maybe whose data has been leaked? And there we have generally in Estonia been very transparent when we have failures. And that transparency creates an additional layer of confidence. It's a knowledge that if something does go wrong, I'll know about it. If something goes wrong, it's going to be worked on really hard by the people sort of responsible for that service, for them to find a solution. And some confidence that the problems that happen are hiccups and they're not sort of disastrous existential challenges, either to the system as a whole or in terms of their impact on me as a user. So if we look at some of the well-documented incidents we've had, for instance, the discovery of some security vulnerabilities in our identity card some years ago, it was the fact that within 72 hours, the Prime Minister was talking about this in television and putting forth a plan to solve these problems that I think really didn't necessarily, we didn't lose the trust in the first place. It kind of gave people the confidence that yes, technology fails, but the underlying human systems are there as a backstop. And I think that's really important, that we want to avoid the types of big scandals where people find out about data leaks, about misuses of their data months or years after they've happened.
Exactly, and granting the private companies access to the government data or the citizen data has been really a taboo topic. So, Oliver, what are the privacy technologies right now in place to bring the transparency to the surface?
I actually want to start from what Luukas said. I think actually open communication, transparent communication is the basis for trust. I mean, if Estonia would have treated its incidents, for example, the incident that we had with our ID card, a little bit different, then I think we would have lost a lot of trust in digital technologies in our society. Second point that I want to make is that in regards to trust, I think a lot of the mindset changes when we start to think about data in a way that who owns that data. If I give my medical records to a hospital, I actually should be the owner of this data, and I give this data to the hospital. And the hospital should actually treat that data as something that is given to them that they need to guard, and that I would have the tools to control. If this kind of framework is in place, then we create a lot of actually, let's say, a lot of the premises for talking about trust and how to control data. I think a lot of the governments that I have seen, or a lot of the discussions, are still in a way that, okay, if I get your data, I own that data. It's either a company or a government, and in this kind of context, the privacy aspects or the control of the data is really lost in the conversation. So we need to turn that around, and I'm really happy that we had this extensive discussions in the Commission, and people are really being educated that they are the owners of the data, and that is being really taken into considerations in the law. This is something that we've done in Estonia since the beginning. Of course, we can do better the enforcement, like Luukas said. Now we're building a universal consent management platform in Estonia, but this I think changes the nature of the discussion. In regards to privacy preserving technologies, I mean, this is something that Cybernetica has worked on for the last 10 years, and what it basically means is how you make queries on confidential data in a way that you don't reveal the individual source, so how you can utilize the data. And I think that actually the world is just, getting ready for these technologies, but these are definitely not in the mainstream, not something that are used in daily lives, but governments, more progressive governments, more advanced, with more advanced capabilities, are already trying to deploy these technologies, and these are getting more and more commercially used. But I think they will become more pervasive in the next 10 years, where we have fundamentally privacy-preserving technologies.
Yes, very passionate topic, the trust and privacy topic, of course. And now to wrap up, we have a question from the audience, and I think that we can incorporate this into the final question as well. So let's give the audience a very concrete takeaway of what to expect from the future, and deriving from the ongoing warfare, including the cyber attacks. Let's not go into politics, but treat the situation as ground zero for the e-governance build-up. So I would ask each one of you to just give one simple word of what would your suggestion be to how to develop next generation digital governance to manage crises and unplanned events. Barbara, can we start with you?
Yeah, two things. On one side, we need to put at the core words such as trust and people, so that digital becomes a way to strengthen our democratic systems. And second, we need to focus on agility and sustainability, because we need to make sure that all our decision-making processes and systems are less vulnerable in unprecedented emergency situations.
Thank you. Luukas.
Well, I'll get political. I would say that Ukraine has really been working over the last couple of years, in a real digital transformation of their government, and it's not a sort of standalone process aside from the political transformation of the country. It goes hand in hand with their efforts to make the country more accountable, more democratic, more open to citizens. And first of all, I mean, let's not talk. Ukraine is going to win this war. Strategically, they're going to win this war. I think the tragedy is going to be that there are going to be many more losses before they do. But when that happens, we're going to need to help Ukraine flourish and rebuild, both Ukrainians in Ukraine and the millions of Ukrainians who are currently outside of the borders of Ukraine. And I think that the infrastructure that Ukraine already has around digital government is going to help them do that. It's going to help them come back faster, be more resilient. We're seeing today that the digitization that they have done means that Ukrainians, both in Ukraine and abroad, have digital identity, which allows the government to give them support and services even when the physical situation is, frankly, literally under bombing attack on a daily basis. One of the things that we also see is the more modern infrastructure is, the more resilient it is, the more easy it is to create. Well, today I think the Ukrainian government announced that they're looking to have backups of government data outside of Ukraine. So again, that's one of the things where the more you virtualize your infrastructure, the more it's based on modern cloud technologies, the easier it is to move it and to do that. So I think that we actually see a case here where the sort of some of the boring technical things that we talk about in the context of digital government are actually being put to the test, and having gotten those things right makes your system more resilient in a way that has a very direct bearing and impact on people in a very difficult situation. Now, I'd say nothing would help Ukraine as much as the war ending, but beyond that, I think that once it ends, and as Ukrainians deal with the consequences right now, or deal with the really the terrible situation they face, having these infrastructures and these services in place will help them.
Oliver, you really have a couple of words only left.
It's really hard to add anything to what Luukas said, but I will say just a couple of words. First of all, political or not, Cybernetica has worked with the government of Ukraine and with our good partners e-Governance Academy for the last 5 years to help them build a resilient e-government infrastructure. And a couple of words, resilient, how to design your systems in a way that if one node goes down, there is still another node or another nodes that can keep operating. And of course, secondly, security, how to build systems in a way that they cannot be penetrated, that they cannot be hacked.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being a part of this panel and sharing your wonderful insights. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Now it's time to wrap up our e-Estonia digital discussion. We received some questions from the audience asking if it was possible to rewatch the recordings. Yes, you can actually, because we will send them over to you next week when you have registered to our event prior. However, if you haven't, then you're able to look us up from YouTube on our channel e-Estonia to see the recording of this event as well as the previous ones.
Thank you also from my side to being with us throughout the whole event, and make sure that you will be back for our next digital discussion that treats the hot topic, cyber security. That will take place in May already, so keep an eye on our social media and webpage as well. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. The insight from our experts, the takeaway really is that the roadmap for digitalization globally is very much work in progress. A lot of things has been done already, and many things remain to be done, of course, in the years to come. And will we complete digitalization quest? Well, only time will tell. And if we are looking an answer to our question whether digital is the only superpower we really need, I'm going to let you to decide that.
There is one country that we actually already mentioned today, and Luukas did say that Ukraine is a country that has done a lot of progress within the last few years, and they're, even at certain things, they're way ahead of us. And yeah, we're hopeful that at some point in the future we're able to collaborate with each other and share the experiences. But today our hearts are with them. Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini.
Hello and welcome to our very first edition of our digital discussions.
From digital health solutions to combating, of course, also COVID-19 crisis.
Everyone here has and needs to have a secure and unique personal digital identity.
This kind of combined solutions will take actually our services to next level.